Artificial Intelligence, Law and Justice, Session 23. The topic here is Responsible AI in Law and Justice. In the previous session, we saw about responsible AI as a concept. We also looked at the various issues in realizing it, both in practice and then in different sectors. We looked at the various components in responsible AI and then the challenges in making it applicable in different sectors. Moreover, we also underscored why responsible AI has become very important and then why so much of effort is being made to promote responsible AI and then to translate that into action in different contexts, particularly by different sectors. We also looked into some of the cautions and concerns about responsible AI, particularly when the concern that responsible AI could become yet another tick the box thing, or responsible AI could be something that becomes too vague or too ambiguous for people to understand, and then people interpreting it, then implementing it in the way they want. But we need to look into something more, because as a concept, while responsible AI is very interesting and challenging, bringing that into law and justice becomes all the more challenging and then all the more, I won't say difficult, it's becoming all the more trickier. Why? Because what exactly is responsible AI in law and justice is something which is easy to ask, but then very difficult to define. For the simple reason, although there is a UNESCO guidelines, although there are OECD principles, and although there are any number of guidelines and principles on what constitutes raw or responsible AI, taking that to law and justice is not all that simple, because these are very general principles. But when it comes to law and justice, different countries have different legal systems. We know about the common law system, and then different countries have different systems, not just based on the principle of law, but also based upon their historical experience, their constitution, their governance system, and other things. And based on these parameters, a country's law and justice is also structured or tailored in such a way that they constitute the core of that. In the sense, it is the Constitution of India that drives the law and justice system in India. In some other country, it could be something else. But even if we say that democratic constitutions are almost look like the same, there are significant variations among them. And equally important is that not all democratic constitutions give same weightage or same importance to all the rights. So there's a wide variance. And then the wide variance becomes all the more interesting or challenging when we talk of aligning responsible AI with either rule of law or with fundamental rights, or we say that responsible AI should not be having any bias or should not be having any discrimination. And when we say that responsible AI, these are the 7 or 8 principles which are at the core of responsible AI, translating them into corresponding principles that could be put to use in law and justice is not all that simple. Because the very idea of transparency is also linked to the idea of privacy, the idea of obligation to disclose to public, or the way public has got the right to know. Different countries have different ideas, different practices in that. Some countries are very opaque in certain things like private data, but then they are very transparent in certain things like public data. In some countries, both are very difficult to access. So the systems are in such a way that transparency may be mostly in paper, but data availability or persons getting access to data might be very difficult. Similarly, when we say that free from bias and discrimination, it could be something that is self-evident. But then different law systems have different ways of looking at it. Some systems may have affirmative action policies embedded in the law. Some may not have, or some may be talking of very general equality. On the other hand, some systems may not be talking of general equality, but they may be skewed when it comes to gender equality. In the sense that by default, the system may look at as general equality, but in practice, different laws and then different practices may not be gender equal or gender neutral when it comes to some circumstances. So the idea here is that it is very difficult to pinpoint where exactly this will fit in where, and then translate that into actionable points in different circumstances when it comes to law and justice. Then comes the question of civil law, criminal law, different branches in law. And we have seen this, that why in criminal justice system, the application of AI is all the more controversial and then all the more challenging to implement. And why it has become all the more not only controversial and challenging, but also worrisome as well. So when we talk of responsible AI in criminal justice system, certain ideas or certain principles have to be given more importance. Versus the same may not be the true with civil law. And if you talk of labor law, again certain principles like non-discrimination, right to equality should be given more importance. And then the responsible AI system that deals with labor law should be something that assigns the significant weightage to them. So these are some of the fundamental issues when we talk of responsible AI in law and justice. Then comes the scale of technology adoption. Like how do we develop technology that is fulfilling a responsible AI across the law and justice? If the system is not going to be so adaptive in the sense that it is going to be selectively adopted, then we should look at where exactly we need to fit in with the REA principles. But different countries have different codes of conduct. For example, different bar associations have different codes of conduct, ethical guidelines, and then the legal profession itself is a self-regulating one, although there could be other laws that regulate the legal profession. And then judges are governed by code of conduct and ethical guidelines. But these things, however much they may appear to be same or identical when they look to prima facie, there could be substantial and then lot of differences in them. For example, what could be permissible in one jurisdiction as a permissible behavior or permissible code of conduct under conduct for an advocate might be totally prohibited in another one. Same thing with the judges. So when these things come, it becomes very difficult to really translate things into actionable points. Then comes the whole question of opacity. So opacity in system in law and justice, we need to really figure out whether system itself is opaque, particularly in law and justice. Responsible AI is all the more important. But if a system is in such a way, or the judicial and the legal system is in such a condition that it prefers to have some opaque system rather than to ask for or demand responsible AI based system. And then the risks of categorization are also there, in the sense that when we talk of responsible AI in law and justice, how do we categorize them? Which are more important, which are less important of the 7 or 8 principles? Which they should be prioritized is also more there. And so is the potential risk. What would be the potential risk if some norms are not given that much importance? There could be a lot of difference of opinion, because in some jurisdictions, privacy may not be a fully acceptable or fully judiciable fundamental right. It would be left to the government to decide on the level of privacy people can enjoy. In some other systems, privacy can be the fundamental right, and the state could be sued if the state violates the privacy laws. But the AI systems will have to be factored taking into account. So can one argue in a system where privacy is not the fundamental right in the way that it operates in other countries, should the responsible AI be tweaked to that in such a way that it waters down the level of privacy as a major concern, or should it be that it be based on universal principles? Because if we do that, then the responsible AI system will find a lot of faults with the system, and then that could become a contentious issue. If the lawyers agree that we can compromise privacy in the name of national security, or we can compromise privacy in the name of something else, but if the responsible AI principles strictly talk about transparency, accountability, privacy and all, there could be a conflict. But this is not just hypothetical, this is a real issue. Then there is a divergent differentiation. In the last class, we saw how different bar associations, different state level associations are trying to come to grips with ethics in AI by issuing different guidelines. So even within a country like USA, there is no homogenized approach, or there is no harmonization, because each association will have its own previous precedents and then its own specific factors and then specific rules. So looking that all into account, they will come up with specific guidelines. So while the American Bar Association's broader guidelines may be applicable to all, if you are practicing 10 the guideline that is more tweaked to your local bar requirements would be applicable. And then the same thing would also be applicable in countries where the bar associations themselves have something like a code of ethics, good conduct and all, but then they are not fully equipped technically and otherwise to come to grips with AI. Because AI adoption across the countries in AI law and justice is not even, and then many countries do not have sufficient capacity in AI itself to implement it in all the spheres. So that could be a reason where some country may still be struggling with the older ones, where it will be doesn't make sense to talk of responsible AI. The UN agencies have actually taken up a lot of interest, and in fact, they're working on many things that's related to law and justice. Many of the UN agencies are part and parcel of the UN system's larger initiative on capacity building, framing guidelines, developing toolkits, and so many other things are happening. Two institutions I want to highlight in this. One is UNESCO. We have seen about what UNESCO is doing. The other is United Nations Inter-Regional Crime Justice Research Institute, or UNICRI, UNICRI. So UNICRI has come up with a responsible AI toolkit for in law enforcement. But when we talk of judicial decision making, we also need to take into account how the human decision making in different jurisdictions work. Because the fundamental principles may appear to be the same, but the way they work would be totally different. There could be specific reasons for it. And AI models make decisions on complex models, and understanding them is not simple. That's the first level of complexity. Then the complexity in judicial use needs to be understood, because often the judicial system itself would be a labyrinth where, putting that in the terms of responsible AI itself may be a difficult one to understand. Then when it comes to different levels of transparency or different levels of accountability or different levels of privacy and fundamental rights, the question comes, what exactly should responsible AI in those contexts be? It should be a mute spectator, or can we say that we can water down responsible AI criteria and other things when we assess systems, or when we say that responsible AI based systems in these countries will not meet these standards which are applicable elsewhere but not in this country. So this divergence and differentiation is a major factor that in fact also tells us that applying AI in law and justice is much more difficult and much more challenging than what one would imagine. So the UNICRI has come up with this recommended pathway where it says you start with the readme text, then introduction to responsible AI innovation, then you go to organizational readiness assessment. In fact, UNESCO has done good amount of work in it, where they call it rapid assessment methodology. They have developed a methodology as to how they can assess the organization's capacity for responsible AI or for adhering to AI principles. Then responsible AI and risk assessment obviously will go hand together. So they have given some guidelines for it. So complete risk assessment questionnaire in AI lifecycle itself, then understand the potential threats, then align decision making with principle for responsible AI innovation, then conduct risk assessment periodically. So this is the broad diagram which they have given, which again is very important and very interesting. But this is given in the context of not just law and justice. This is given in the context of very specifically legal, in the sense that for law enforcement. So the similar one may not be applicable in general for law and justice. Question is that how do we make these them reliable and trustworthy? And then how do we bring in transparency and accountability? So the legal requirements, translating them into RA categories means that they should be credible. And then the critical decision making system should again be based upon RA principles. So we need to bring in trustworthiness, critical decision making, and then when it comes to law and justice, although explainable AI is important, explainable AI in my view is all the more important, and that should be something that should go hand in hand with developing responsible AI systems. One way to look at is that in addition to the specific responsible AI principles, we need to have something more, in the sense that the law and justice AI systems should guarantee against bias and discriminatory outcomes. This is going one step than that. I mean, they are free from bias and discrimination. It is not just free and and they don't have. They should guarantee against, in the sense that go one step more to ensure that there is no element of bias and discriminatory outcome on account of the functioning of the system. But there are issues like opacity in the AI systems. Again, how do you define bias in legal terms? How do you define discrimination in legal terms? Because these are again very contentious issues. What may appear to be a bias to me may appear to be something like a normal one for somebody else. Because someone else may say that I do not see any gender bias in that, people were treated equally. And then X person may say that no, there's a specific gender bias in this because they were not treated equally. They were looked like they were treated equally, but then the decision was not based on that. So lawyers and judges themselves may not be very familiar with how to translate this into something that is like guarantee against bias and discriminatory outcome. So if the system is going to result in biases, discriminatory outcomes, they themselves may be impacted. But then they need to really understand well the system. They should again go back to explain AI. They need to work with the developers to ensure that this does not happen. But the challenges in addressing bias in legal terms or even in practical terms are many. Because what happens when a decision making is done based on so many parameters and on so many criteria, what could appear to be a bias to me may not appear to be a bias to someone else. So the decision making can be challenged, and the two judges may look at the same decision making too differently, and then we see this happen when two judges in a bench come with totally different judgments. Either it goes to a third judge or it goes to a larger bench. So when this is the real issue in law and justice, how do we translate these sort of things into responsible AI is a problematic one. Or what sort of bias and discrimination responsible AI should be sensitized to. Then the question of understanding reasons behind AI systems. So if we talk of responsible AI, then we should also understand that we should bring responsible AI as a criteria to fulfill, to bring in more transparency. And then to make that as a holistic perspective, we should bring all the 7 principles and then say each one of them is applicable, each one of them is fulfilled. Otherwise, what would happen is that the system may look responsible AI fulfilled, but not all of them will be fulfilled 100%, or it may be more in letter than a letter in spirit. So these sort of things need to be factored in. And then the solution should be systematic algorithmic audit should be built in law and justice systems, because systematic algorithmic audit is something that is primarily important to bring in accountability, to enhance the transparency and then make the system more credible. But how do you translate systematic algorithm audit as part of responsible AI has got a lot of practical things to be looked into. So the idea is integrating that as a part of the larger transparency framework or part of a larger REA framework is difficult. Then better to test the system for different factual backgrounds and then assess that in comparison with human judgment. So when this is done, we are not talking in terms of mere abstract responsible AI principles. We are talking in terms of the system being tested for different factual backgrounds or different case laws, and then see how the decision making is done versus how the human would have taken a decision. Or to put it other way around, if the system is fed a well decided case and then based on the same factors, same parameters, same cases and everything, how does the system arrive at? So this will help us to understand whether the system is really fulfilling the responsible AI criteria, and then when we compare with human judgment, we may get a better idea as to it is also possible that the human judgment may have some bias and discrimination, but that could be less or more that of the AI based system. So we need to really do a lot of homework, or we need to really do a lot of nuanced understanding and then working when we talk of responsible AI in law and practice, rather than talking in terms of mere general principles. But the discriminatory outcome could occur on account of other factors. And then the lack of transparency becomes understanding underlying logic we won't know. Impact on affected individuals has to be factored in. So the responsible AI systems should also flag certain things, in the sense that there is a potential of certain things going wrong when it comes to transparency, and then flag it at that stage and then say that the system looks prima facie to fulfill the criteria of transparency, but down deeper level, it is not exactly fulfilling the level of transparency which is expected of a legal system. So when individuals are affected by the unclear operations or by automated systems, there could be many problems. The government may say that this is a responsible AI system. It adheres to that. We have done quality check, we have done audit, we have the criteria met by somebody, certified by somebody. But the capabilities in the system may not be well designed, or the system design may have some problematic things that could hinder decision making by the system going in a biased way. Or that could be the reason where the system could take wrong decisions, although prima facie it may appear to be right. So question here is that since we talk of law and justice systems being very sensitive, need to be adhered to a level of much more transparency, much more higher level of realization of RAI. Translating these things into practice means lot of work, homework need to be done. Lot of things has to be tested, retested, maybe doing some reverse engineering of the algorithmic thinking and then find out where exactly it happened. But the question is that, as we saw, the bar associations will jump immediately talking to AI ethics because it is something they understand. And then ethical principles are also easy to tinker around in the sense that you apply one ethical principle, tweak it around, put it in other context. So it is easy to come up with revised AI ethics guidelines than to coming up with revised or starting afresh responsible AI guidelines in law and justice. But as we saw, responsible AI is not something that is equivalent to ethics plus. So defining AI as more than ethics plus is necessary because right now many of the bar associations are stopping with ethical guidelines in the context of AI. But then this needs to be developed further. Ethics is an old idea. People are familiar, justice are familiar, legal system is familiar, broader contact, good behavior, everything is known. But then the idea of RA itself is so new that people may not be very familiar, or their understanding may be constrained by the earlier understanding of ethics. People may think that this is nothing but translating ethics into AI systems in the garb of responsible AI. So that sort of clarity should be brought in. Then RAI principles are often tailored to user preferences. For example, the user of a system in the banking system would prefer a responsible AI system that meets certain legal characteristics or that fulfills certain standards set by the banking authority. But then that responsible AI system may not fulfill 7% all the criteria of all the 7 or 8 principles. So when it comes to law and justice, we may not even know as to what are the user preferences. If the state says that I would prefer a system that is fast, very efficient, and then gives the judgment very soon, or it is not something that is not very liberal when it comes to giving bails or when it comes to giving remissions, then the whole idea is that if the user's preferences are going to decide what the system will do, then responsible AI bringing that into that will be very difficult. So responsibility, when it is put on developers, they need to negotiate. They can at least say that we will not be able to develop a 100% responsible AI system to meet your needs or to meet your preferences. So the ideal characteristics of responsible AI system in law and justice is something. This again you may say it's very utopian, very difficult to practice. It enhances credibility and acceptability. At the next level, it makes responsible AI possible. Then, even otherwise, responsible AI on its own is a good goal that is worth pursuing, irrespective of all the problems which we have highlighted now. So, we can bring in responsible AI into law and justice system by bringing more accountability, by allowing stakeholders to validate and audit decision making process, but then at what stage it should be done. For example, if there's a question of serious punishment in a criminal justice system, that is exceeds 10 years or more, and if the judge had used the AI based tools to get an understanding or to help him or her in writing the decision, then the stakeholders or the person who was to be affected should have the right to question the responsible AI-ness of the system. So this is something which is equally important, but then even at the level of building a system, if stakeholders can be involved, some of the things like transparency can be enhanced. Then aligning with ethical standards and legal requirements has to be done with care, because it's again contextual. As we said, different states, different jurisdictions, different courts have different norms when it comes to ethics. What is 10% permissible? What is considered as permissible but not desirable? What is considered as desirable but not abhorrable, in the sense that nobody does it, although there is no bar on it. So these minute, nuanced understanding is necessary when we talk of responsible AI in law and justice. So again, we need to look at the responsible AI system in law and justice as an entire model, individual components, and then training algorithm. Only then we will be able to understand whether the responsible AI principles are fully embedded and then enmeshed and operate in the system as a whole. Otherwise, what would happen? We may be looking at certain things in certain places and then ticking in the boxes. We may forget that in some other instances, in some other part of the system, responsible may be AI may be just there only for the namesake. So translation challenges are very there, from abstract to concrete to specific, different interpretations put into practice, expectation realization. So one way to overcome some of these initial teething troubles is that understand responsible AI as an ideal that cannot be realized in one go, in the sense that you would need to tweak the system. Lots of trial and error would be needed to make the responsible AI system workable. Then also understand that the system may score high on one parameter, but may not be scoring that high on other parameters. So that sort of thing we need to really factor in, because if the system scores high on, say, transparency and accountability, but then does not score high on some other parameter, what exactly is the reason? We need to be that need to be looked into. It could be that the designers and then the people who wanted the system to be developed had a conversation, and then based upon the conversation, the people who wanted the system to be developed assigned low priority to two or three parameters and then assigned a higher priority to other parameters. But then they wanted this to be incorporated, but not to this level of importance. So translating that again will vary depending upon the importance, depending upon the priority. But as a common principle, it should be made ensure that at least all the systems in law and justice where AI is used adhere to the responsible AI principles at least to a minimum level. It is not that certain things, values and principles can be simply knocked off and then we can claim that only these are essential for us. So as we said, take that as a journey than as an all-in-one go approach. And then start if minimum criteria meets them. Different systems may have different objectives and priorities. So focus on specific output decision making, whether it is criminal justice or law justice. And then we also need to look into the differences between responsible AI ethics and explainable AI ethics, explainable AI, and then see that these are not conflicted upon, or these are not taken as substitute as one for another when it comes to building responsible AI systems. Although the three are interlinked, the objectives are not the same. But understanding the ethics and explainable AI is necessary for responsible AI systems to be developed. So the conclusion here is that variations in understanding responsible AI. Translating AI into AI systems in law and justice depends upon variations in understanding. In many jurisdictions, there is no specific guidelines on procedures for incorporating AI. So the paradox is there is much talk, but in terms of guidelines, there is much little is available that would be useful for both the developer, the legal profession, the judges themselves, as well as the users. So the question of risk of misinterpretation, misalignment will happen because responsible AI could be misinterpreted differently. We did not dwell that in detail in this lecture because this is something which we have talked of even earlier in another context. Transparency can be misinterpreted and then it could be misaligned with something else. And then responsibility and oversight by collaboration and incorporating AI from the conception system is important. Or responsible AI cannot be an afterthought. It should be something that should be taken as a key component right from the way the system is going to be designed, and then this system is going to be looked into or the right from the way the need for the system is decided, or the tender for that is decided, and then the government comes up with the tender. There itself it should be made that this system, AI system for law and justice, will adhere to responsible AI principles, and then these are what this. But then this is again the broader principle or the broader idea of bringing in responsible AI in the public procurement system. That again is a very different concept which we will not go into because that's not something that is directly related to law and justice. But bringing responsible AI into the public procurement system is something that would really help in making the AI systems in law and justice more aligned with responsible AI. So we need to understand that responsible AI in law and justice is not a simple thing. It's going to be quite complex, challenging and demanding. At the same time, it's inevitable. Now, in this short lecture, we have not gone into too many details. We have not given too many explanations, nor we have looked into too many different things from different countries. For the simple reason, the field is very evolving, and at this time, it is too premature to highlight certain things as good examples or the better ones, or to highlight them as the ones that could be adopted. It is also equally important that in many jurisdictions, many bar associations have not categorically come up with responsible AI guidelines or responsible AI specific guidelines. Similarly, although UN organizations like UNESCO and then the UNICAR have been working on responsible AI in law and justice, lots and lots of things need to be done. For example, the responsible AI toolkit which UNESCO brought for judges is a good example, and then one country, Colombia, has adopted it. But then much more needs to be done because that toolkit itself addresses only some specific issues, and then it addresses only some specific values in responsible AI. But to incorporate all the elements of responsible AI is a much broader work, much larger work, and more importantly, much demanding work. That is why in this lecture I have not gone into level of depth which I have done in some other lectures on rule of law or rule of law in AI or algorithmic decision making, because there much more than literature, much more than anything else, there are a lot of legal principles which have been discussed. Whereas in the case of RA, responsible AI in law and justice, much more needs to be in fact written about, discussed, and then we need to develop that field in a much more better way than what it is now. Thank you. In the next class, we will look into what is responsible AI in law and justice in India. That again will be very contextual. So the challenge here we will be talking about is that how do we translate responsible AI in the Indian context, and then who is working on it and what's happening.